The power of people organized for change is tremendous. And I can think of no one that exemplifies this power more than our morning keynote address. Alicia Garza. Alicia is the co-founder of Black Lives Matter, which has grown into a national organizing project that has signified an affirmation and embrace of the resistance and resilience of Black people. She is also the Special Projects Director at the National Domestic Workers Alliance. We are privileged to have her here with us today, and it is my honor to welcome her onto the stage.
Morning. Ooh, let's try that again. Good morning.
Good morning.
I want to start off by thanking Alliance for Girls, thanking Emma, thanking Sarah for her powerful testimony this morning. It's not easy to stand up here, y'all. I also wanted to spend my time with you all this morning, thanking you for your commitment, thanking you for your service, and raising some new questions about what's next. You all have forged some incredible, incredible paths, and that is not easy to do. In the face of budget cuts, in the face of a growing conservatism in our cities, in the face of dwindling resources, they're not really dwindling. They're being allocated in ways that are challenging the work that we're doing. You all are showing incredible perseverance, courage, innovation. And so I want to talk with you all this morning about what's next. Where do we go from here? Because as I understand it, not only are you doing incredible work to have gotten you to this point, but you are certainly at the crest of a cliff that you can either fly off of, right, to reach the next one, or sometimes what happens is we stay in place. So I want to encourage you all this morning to not stay in place. So I was asked to talk a little bit about Black Lives Matter and where it comes from. And I want to do that from the perspective, not just of being a co-founder, but certainly from the perspective of why we created this organizing network. And I'm going to start off by encouraging us to remember that Black Lives Matter is much more than a hashtag. Everybody say it with me. More than a hashtag. I'm actually baffled, right, when I keep seeing media recreations of the work that we're doing, and it's just saying the hashtag that started a movement. Hashtags don't start movements. Courageous, bold, innovative people start movements. Black Lives Matter was created as an intervention. It was created as a vehicle of love, fundamentally. When we started Black Lives Matter, it was kind of on accident. It wasn't a startup, didn't have funding, wasn't a 501c3. It was a cry of rage. Because you see, in 2013, when Trayvon Martin was brutally murdered in his own community, and his murderer was allowed to go free with no accountability, Black Lives Matter was born. Now, I didn't know Trayvon Martin, but I do have a 24-year-old brother. He's 6 feet tall. He's living in Marin County. We're born and raised there. It's not a lot of Black folks in Marin County, y'all. He's as sweet as he can be. He's an artist. He's a skateboarder, videographer, has never hurt a fly. And he's growing up in a community that even though he is an incredible person, even though he would do anything for anyone, unfortunately, we don't ask those questions first. Unfortunately, what it means for him to grow up in a community that's not actually that much unlike Sanford, Florida, is that his life is always at risk, through no fault of his own. When I watched the trial of George Zimmerman, and you know folks were calling it the trial of Trayvon Martin, he was dead. As I watched that trial, I watched him be vilified. I watched his family, his mother and his father, be vilified. I watched his friend, the last person to have spoken with him on the phone before he was murdered, be vilified. And yet still, I thought to myself, this man is going to be held accountable. There's no way that you can take someone's child for no reason and not be made to pay consequences. And so when the verdict was announced that George Zimmerman would be acquitted of all charges and that he would walk free, I felt like I had gotten punched in the stomach. It was a visceral reaction. And I watched as people around me, black folks around me, our shoulders dropped, our heads dropped, our eyes averted each other's gaze. Because what that trial said was not just that George Zimmerman was not guilty. That trial said, your life does not matter. And it's not just the murder of Trayvon Martin. We hear a lot about black boys and men who are being murdered by the very people who are supposed to protect and serve our communities. What we don't hear a lot about are the women, the girls, the queer, the trans, black folks, people of color who are also being murdered. What didn't make national headlines was the officer in Oklahoma who sexually assaulted more than 8 black women while on duty, propositioned these women and offered them a way out of something that they hadn't done in exchange for their dignity. What didn't make national headlines, at least not in the way we wanted it to, was Miriam Carey, who was suffering from a mental health crisis and was gunned down at our nation's capital. What didn't make national headlines was Maya Hall, who was murdered just a few weeks before Freddie Gray in Baltimore, a black trans woman living a street life who was killed. So as we call the names of our brothers like Trayvon Martin and Freddie Gray and Mike Brown, we can't forget the names of Ayanna Stanley Jones, who was 7 when she was killed in her home during a botched police raid in Detroit. We must not forget the names of people like Renisha McBride, who was gunned down on a porch as she asked for help after being in a car accident. We must not forget the names of people like Pearl Underwood, a 92-year-old woman in Georgia who was killed by the police. So again, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we must remember that it is much more than a hashtag. Now, I started off my comments this morning reminding us that hashtags don't start movements, people do. And to be honest with you, when we uttered the words Black Lives Matter, our first intention was to bring people together under a common vision to fight what is a generations-old epidemic of Black lives not mattering. And as organizers, not social media activists, y'all, I barely know how to use these things. For real. As organizers, we understand the importance of exercising our collective power in the service of a collective vision. When I say Black Lives Matter was an intervention, it was based on more than 15 years of organizing experience here in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, where Patrice lives, in New York, where Opal lives, and we shared a set of experiences. One of which was, we have been organizing Black women who are migrants, Black women who have been impacted by the criminal system, Black women who are living in public housing, Black women who are poor, Black women who are queer, Black women who are transgendered for a long time. And even though we do this work, we are so used to not being asked to sit at the table. We are so used to being told to shut down pieces of ourselves if we want to be at the table. We are so used to being told to step back while the men handle business. Y'all know what I'm talking about. When we started Black Lives Matter, it was an intervention to say, if all of us are not free, none of us are free. When you ask what is the role of women and girls in this movement, we say, we running things. It's our responsibility, it's our duty, as our sister Asada says, to visibilize the complexity of our experiences, the richness of who we are as people who hold the tatters, and yes, it's tattered, the tatters of our economy and our democracy and our society together. It is our duty to centralize those experiences so that we can transform our economy, our society, and our democracy in the image of who we are at our best, who we are when we live in our full dignity. What would our world look like if Black women did not make 64 cents to every 77 cents that a white woman makes to every dollar that a white man makes? What would our world look like if the average life expectancy for a transgender person was not 35 years old? What can our world look like if Black women were not the fastest growing population in prisons and jails in this country? What would our world look like if all Black lives mattered? And even if you're not Black, what would our world look like if Black lives actually mattered? Now, Ronald Reagan had this thing about trickle down, and that was cool. That's why we're here today. We want to advocate a different way. When we bring the margins to the center, all the benefits and beauty bubbles up like champagne. We love champagne. So in closing, I did see my time's up sign. And I have so much more to say, but in closing, I want to offer us a few words about what it means to build this movement moving forward. Now, we cannot afford to narrowly talk about women and girls as a way to replace the narrow ways that our society is, frankly, built around men and boys. Instead, we need to complicate our frameworks. We need to innovate. We need to innovate. We need to take risks. In this moment where we might have a woman as president for the first time in this country, what are we pushing her to do? Are we pushing her to fight for white middle-class women, or are we pushing her to fight for the girls that we serve? Are we pushing ourselves to align the service work that we do with the organizing work that we must do? Are we pushing ourselves to do things like we've never done them before because we have nothing to lose? So in closing, I'll say, and I do promise it's the closing, if we really believe that all lives matter, we will fight like hell for Black lives today. And the why is because until all of us are free, none of us are free. Thank you.